Welcome to the Midwest Flyways podcast. I'm your host, Cal Ness, and Carter is with me tonight. No Joey, but we have a very special guest back again. Is this the third time, Graham?
Number three,
Graham Greseth of Maxed Out Guides. We're happy to have him. Before we start, guys, these beanies are on the website, so you can go to MidwestFlyways.com and get one of those. And you only have a couple of weeks left to get your Ducks Unlimited Minnesota gun calendars. Graham, I know you already have yours.
correct?
They're $64, and if you go to the description in the podcast right here, you can go and get one just by Venmoing. So there's a link right in there. There's over 777 guns they're giving away, and I think if you get one of these calendars, you have a really, really good chance. They're going to announce multiple winners every day, 4 $10,000 cash prizes. It's pretty crazy. So gets you your membership to Ducks Unlimited as well. Help us conserve ducks in Minnesota. Let's get some intro music, Carter. All right, Graham. Welcome back, man.
Thanks, buddy.
We're going to talk about a few different things tonight, and I think one of the things that I read the other day that I kind of want to start with, we have a continuation of declining duck stamp sales in Minnesota.
Yep.
And it is pretty crazy. A lot of people don't know this. In 1980, we sold 150,000 duck stamps in Minnesota alone. Last year, at the close of duck season, we sold 70,751 duck stamps. So in the last 45 years, we're down more than 50%
Yep.
in duck stamp sales. And it's a troubling thing for me, especially because as I think about how much I love duck hunting and the fact that we are just continuing to see this decline of it, and especially, you know, as we think about the younger generation, what's happening in your opinion? Like because there's a lot of factors in this,
Right.
but what's the biggest thing that's going on that's causing people to not go and hunt?
You know, I think if you look at our world now and just everybody has so much shit going on.
Yeah.
Right. You know, you think back in the day in 1978 or whenever they started, what the number you originally pulled up, which was, if it was 1978, it's a great year because that was the year I was born. But
1980. So
1980, well, close, but
wrong.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, if you think about things back then, we didn't have social media. We did, you know, it was probably a much simpler time, and you know, you didn't have kids in multiple youth sports and trainers, and you know, 12-month hockey, and you know, just all the different things that take up our time now. And you know, that's where I experience it from, because that's what I'm living. You know, our kids are 15 to 8, and you know, right now I'm here. My wife is got 3 practices and 2 different trainings to get kids to while I'm here at this show. You know,
Now you're making me feel guilty.
right? Exactly.
We just started, Graham.
I know. But, you know, so if you think about those things, and like you just think about all the things that fill our schedule and fill our time, people just don't make the time to get out and hunt anymore. And because we see it every day. Like, we talk to dads that, you know, it's just like it's a broken record. I used to do this. I love to do this. I don't have the time anymore. I've been waiting to get my kids out. I haven't been able to get them out, and finally I just said I got to do it. So that's why we're here, you know. So that's just one person. You take that and expand that exponentially by people that, you know, don't want to hire a guide service and they're do-it-yourselfers and whatever. You know, all of those things contribute, and just taking up people's time. So, you know, hunting becomes less and less of a priority, even though the people that don't do it know how much they miss it and know how great it is. And it's just figuring out, how do we make time for all that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, but the thing that concerns me the most about what you just said is that's just breeding the disconnect further, in the sense that, you know, there's more people obviously in Minnesota now than there were in 1980.
Yep.
And people were obviously still busy back then.
Yep.
And it's more that question of like, okay, well, if you're talking about, you know, a lot of people, you know, that are in their 30s and 40s who maybe aren't hunting as much anymore because they have kids.
Yep.
Now you're disconnecting the kids from the hunting too, which continues to just breed this gap, you know, further and further away from having a lot of people in this state that care about duck and goose hunting.
Yeah.
And I think this is happening a lot of, in other places around the country. And obviously, in the South, there's a lot more of a tradition and a crazy history. And, it's a lot more part of their culture.
Yep.
But I think, it's one of those things too, where it's like, we also are losing the public land, and that makes it a lot harder for people to get out.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you, you kind of brought up social media.
Yep.
Like, what role does social media actually play in this, though? Because it is just intimidating people?
It could be. People don't typically post social media pictures of 1 or 2 ducks anymore, right? So it's like you got to shoot a stack, or it's not making the gram. So I think what you're saying, those guys in the 30s and 40s, that's probably a really good point, because now, we're in Minnesota, obviously, and you guys have listeners from around the country, but like specifically here for us, people in the 30s and 40s, in their 30s and 40s, probably grew up duck hunting at a time where Minnesota duck hunting was kind of going through a transition. It went through a pretty tough stretch for a while. We lost a lot of water. We lost a lot of ground, and things were tough for a while. And I think also how people, used to hunt them changed. It always used to be, hunting marshes, hunting sloughs, hunting ponds, that type of thing. And now a lot of those have went away. So the people, like, that's what they knew. That's how they knew how to hunt. So the ponds that they had less ducks, and there was less, sloughs overall to hunt anyway. And I think there was kind of a tough time for a lot of hunters. And a lot of those guys right now are the guys that have kids. They have 8, 9, 10, 15, just like me in that same age group. And, they probably struggle making time for that again, because it was so tough. And, it just may be a little bit of a generation gap. I would guess they're probably going through some of that stuff in the South right now. Like, you always think about Louisiana. Louisiana was like the duck killing capital of the world forever. And now, it's really tough down there because they just don't get their birds, So there's a lot of people from Louisiana that grew up hunting them that are now going on to other things because they just don't get ducks in Louisiana anymore.
Yeah. So you think legitimate, and it's a real thought. The fact that we get less birds in Minnesota, in my opinion, than we have in past years, like when you're talking about the 80s, I don't think you could ask a lot of people that hunted the 80s and they'd tell you that there's, as many or more birds now than there were then.
Right.
And so I think you have to ask the question too, like how much of it has to do with the fact that people are looking around going, people aren't really shooting that many birds anyway.
Right.
Do you think that plays a pretty big role in it?
I think so. I mean, people dads come to us with their kids because if they have gotten them out and they don't shoot anything, the kids lose interest. It's fun at first, but if they go on a couple of hunts and they don't get anything or they don't see anything, getting little Timmy to get out of bed at 4:00 in the morning and go sit in a slough where they're not going to shoot anything, that only lasts so long. So they do have to experience success at some point in order for them to kind of, just build that fire a little bit more. Yeah,
it's funny you mention it too. This weekend I took my boss and his son out, and it was his son's first time going on a duck hunt.
How old?
14.
Okay.
And needless to say, it wasn't a good hunt. Like we didn't shoot anything. And we had some birds look at us a little bit, but nothing where, when it's like a 14-year-old's first hunt, like you really need a mallard to center up and, give him a good shot at it.
Yep.
And I think he was expecting there to be a little more fireworks.
Yep.
And I think part of it made me really think about it because he had told me that he had watched some of our videos. Okay. And let's be honest, man, like we don't publish a lot of videos when we have a shitty hunt.
Right.
Most of the stuff that we're putting out there is like, hey, we had a pretty good hunt.
Yep. It's the best.
Or there's like a story that's, it's more about the story than it is about the birds.
Right.
But and he told me that. He's like, yeah, I watched some of your videos. And then we're sitting out there, and we're having like this super boring, like we had a great time and it was fun. And, you have to ask the question, like, is it better for them to see that side of it and still want to come out versus them going out and just being on a banger? I don't know.
Yeah.
As a dad who's brought kids hunting a lot of times, is it like, if you don't think you're going to shoot things, are you like, I'm not going to bring anybody because I want them to have that awesome first experience?
No, I mean, for me, with my boys. So juniors, 15.
Yep.
Jed just got his firearm safety this year. He's 12. So getting them out for the first time, like there's many times that I could have taken them out this season. I took them out both of them out multiple times this year. And there were times that I could have taken them on what I knew was going to be a banger.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I took them on some, but I didn't take them on all because sometimes I wanted them just to kind of sit and see what it's all about. It isn't always going to just be a nonstop action-packed barrel burner.
Right.
Doesn't matter who you are, what you do, no matter, there's just not every day is going to be like that.
For sure.
So I wanted them to be able to experience a little bit of everything. And, my oldest, Graham Jr., he would ask me, he's like, well, Dad, are we going to go out with Mike today? And are we going to go on that big duck feed? He's like, nah, bud, we're going to go sit at the cornhole.
Yeah.
And
oh, too bad.
Well, right. This year is different because the cornhole wasn't the cornhole this year because we didn't get it. So it wasn't as good this year. But, we shot some ducks out there. It just wasn't as good as it was last year because we didn't have the food. But, but I wanted him to experience that, and at the end of the year, it was kind of he was out there by himself over deer hunting. I was out in South Dakota guiding hunts. They were all deer hunting. He had shot his doe. He went out and sat, and he was sitting there, and a single goose came in, landed, and he called me, and he's like, Dad, there's a goose like right in front of me. I was like, okay, well, what's your plan? And he's like, well, I don't have waiters.
Yeah.
Like, okay. And so he's like, I got to wait. So he waited. He ended up shooting the bird, right? And he retrieved it. But where I was proud of him because of it, and I think it goes back to some of those things where he's experienced really good hunts, really slow hunts, everything in between. When that bird came in and he was just by himself, he had never been hunting by himself before.
Yeah.
He didn't lose his mind, right? He realized the bird was too far. He waited. He had swam in. When it went down to feed, he stepped out of the blinds, walked to the edge of the water and canned it.
Yeah. And
then waited for it to float to the other side, picked it up. But I guess to the point where I'm going with that is that because he's been on good hunts, bad hunts, everything in between.
Yeah.
And I guess there's really is never a bad hunts. There's slow hunts. But he's been on slow hunts. So he was, just kind of able to process all of that and not just get so worked up and so nuts about it that he was able to still, kind of keep his wits about him, have a plan. And that's something that I don't know if I could have done as a kid.
Yeah.
So I think
sure.
you there is value in that.
Yeah.
Like there is value in just knowing that you have to wait. It's not always going to be a barrel burner. Sometimes you just have to maximize the very few opportunities that you get.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also something that's very realistic and especially for people that aren't guiding. Every single day you're out, you're on the road, you got scouts on the road, like you're finding fields,
Yep.
For guys that are doing it maybe let's say 3 days a week. Guys are committed to during duck season that might go no Fridays, like guys that are serious enough that they're out 3 days a week, like they want to hunt as much as they can. They might go on a couple trips. Like for those guys, you might have 5 okay hunts or even bad hunts to get that one really good hunt.
Right. Yep.
If you're limited to being in your kind of area that you're in within an hour of that somewhat maybe of scouting, the reality is for all these kids that are going out for the first time, unless you're in a place where like you are, Graham, where you're like running a legit big operation.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reality is, man, like you're going to have 5 hunts where you shoot a couple geese, 5 geese, 10 geese.
Yeah.
To get that one day where you have 10 buddies and you guys can shoot 50.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's just the reality. And if you don't love going out and shooting a couple geese and just being out there to be there and have fun, you probably won't get that serious about waterfowl hunting.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with it. If you're a casual waterfowl hunter, just get a guide.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong with, hey, like I'm going to go out 3 times this year and hire a guide and go and shoot them really good and have fun.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
I do think that when you think about that idea, though, of like, oh, I only want to go out a couple times a year, I'm going to just hire a guide, that gets like poo-pooed on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, if you're not a public hunter only, I think it used to be, when I talk to guides that have been doing it for a really long time, dudes that have been doing it since the 90s, I think that there used to be, a lot more of an acceptance of people being like a casual hunter.
Yep.
And I think is something that doesn't get talked about very often is kind of this thought process of, we really need to be a lot more encouraging of people being okay with people just hunting twice a year.
Yeah.
Like, dude, there's nothing wrong with it. If you can only get out twice a year and you want to hire a guy for $300 a gun a day, just go on a great hunt twice a year,
Yep.
Spend the $1,200 or whatever it is and just go out and make sure that if that's your duck season or your goose season, that's great.
Yeah.
But I think that gets really shit on, man.
Well, I think it's hard for people, people have that tendency to think that everybody does things the way that they do things, and they,
oh yeah,
that's their this is my expectation, so this is everybody's expectation. And I don't remember what it is, and maybe Carter can look it up while we're talking, but there was at one point I used to know the number of there's the average number of ducks or pieces of waterfowl, right, that the average hunter shoots per season, right? So big shoots, everybody, guides, so all of them. And it's not very many.
Yeah.
The average waterfowl hunter does not shoot very many pieces of fowl
for sure
throughout the entire season. So we, many times our guides look at a, 5-10 bird hunt as terrible.
Right.
And because that's generally what we're accustomed to. But for most people, that's their best hunt of the year.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
We get it all the time. We get done with hunts all the time, and we are just super frustrated. And because we knew what it could have been, right? But our clients, for the most part, we do have clients that are there just expecting to replicate every pile pick that we've ever posted
for sure
on social media. But we have a lot of customers that show up and are like, we shot 10 mallards.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And they're taking pictures and, so it's all about perspective. It's just,
totally.
it's what, it's just what your expectations are and what, and that's different for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's impossible to control 100%. I mean, you'd never know going into it. I'm sure for you have repeat clients where you kind of know what these guys are about or whatever. But yeah, it is kind of a crazy thing, and it really made me think about it. I think as people who are more invested than the average person in waterfowl hunting, it's really, I think, probably our duty to be pretty accepting of everybody, because I think the reality is, if people are being honest with themselves, if you look at these numbers and the trajectory that we're headed on, I don't think people are realizing the bigger issue here is not necessarily nobody's going to hunt ducks anymore.
Yeah.
We are going to have no representation anymore.
Right.
At a state level.
Yeah.
All the laws that have protected our rights to be able to hunt ducks and geese, the less and less of these stamps that get sold, the less and less they give a shit about if we actually like or care to hunt ducks anymore.
Right.
And it's a huge part of what we do, and people don't think about it.
Yeah.
And I understand why. I mean, when you're young, you never, something that you grew up doing or that you have become accustomed to doing, you don't process when you're, younger that could just be taken away from you.
Right.
It's a privilege.
Yep.
It's not necessarily, even though me and you might think it is in this country, it's not necessarily a right.
Right.
And, I think that number, that 70,000 stamps, is kind of scary.
Yeah.
When you think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
I think right now, in general, it is already, there's a lot of gray, sketchy area, in terms of laws and how they're interpreted. And I do think that deer hunters get more preference, obviously, than duck hunters in this state, without question.
Yeah.
And
I think that's in every state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, and it makes total sense. Which kind of brings me to my next question is, I think people look at deer hunting as a way for them to fill their freezer, but I don't think people look at waterfowl hunting that way.
Yeah. For the most part, some do, but I would say for the most part, no.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people look at duck and goose hunting as more of a fun activity.
Yeah.
Which it is.
Yeah.
But if people knew how to properly process and eat duck and goose meat, I think that would probably change perspective for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I think the question is, we're only allowed to have 3 bag limits in our freezer, which is insane.
You're right.
That's insane.
Yep.
Which from a guide's perspective, how do you deal with that? I mean, it's got to just be like a machine.
Yeah. I mean,
to process birds.
Oh yeah. It's a challenge, and it is one, over the last probably 5 years, there's been more of a spotlight put on that of like how to, properly clean, tag, process birds, all the way through. And there's a very small percentage of the waterfowling population that actually knows that.
Yeah.
We have to stop people all the time from breasting out their birds because we're like, you cannot do that. Like, and it's not because of me. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to get in trouble. You're going to get in trouble. And if you leave this hunt and you shoot 3 limits of mallards for 3 straight days and you drive out of here and you get pulled over and you get a wayside stop and you get a ticket and you just had the greatest 3 days of hunting in your life, but you guys didn't clean these right, what you're going to remember is that ticket and you're not coming back. So those things it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
And most people just don't know. And
there's no education
and it also wasn't
on
been
it.
stressed. Those rules have been around for a long time, but that's really come into light, like I said, probably over the last decade, but especially over the last 5 years.
Well, there's, 80,000 less of us that they can go after for all the other infractions.
Right.
So they've got to find a way to make some of that up.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're going to be sticklers on everything now.
Yep.
But yeah, man, that's kind of crazy. Grant, before we go any further, this podcast is brought to you by Outlaw Beer. We are enjoying an ice cold, refreshing Outlaw Beer right now. And you guys can get these in almost every state in America right now, in Minnesota for sure. So look them up and just go to outlaw.com. It's, I think, outlawbeer.com. And you can find a location that has them. All right, man. So I want to just kind of go into, you run a pretty big operation.
Okay.
And when we have a year like we have in Minnesota, which this happens in other states.
Yep.
But let's talk about Minnesota, and I think people can just relate it in their head to their state that they're in.
Yep.
As a guide, man, let me just kind of get your thought process on when we have a year like this, where we don't have sub-freezing temps until we're well into November.
Yep.
And birds have not pushed out of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just don't have that population that we usually like to have when we're trying to hunt birds in Minnesota. And it seems like this is a continuation of an issue that happens every year.
Yep.
And there's obviously the 10 different arguments and people's opinions.
Yep.
But how are you able to be most successful when it's unpredictable weather, man? I mean, you just have no idea. Like, what are you looking for to try to change things up?
This year was a very unique year. Honestly, was one of our best years ever. I mean, and it which
really
is
was crazy, by the way. For anybody in Minnesota, that's crazy. If you're not in Minnesota, I'm telling you, that's very weird. Yeah, because it's been brutal.
It's been tough. And it's not just Minnesota, because we talk to hunters from all over the place, and that's why a lot of people come on hunts with us, because they say the same thing. Like, it's been terrible at home. It's been the worst duck hunting we've had ever. I mean, there isn't really any place that I can think of that is just celebrating how great their duck hunting has been over the last 3 years, right?
Canada.
Well, except for Canada. Yeah, exactly. But everybody in the U.S., no matter, it doesn't really matter. There might be pockets, but the general consensus throughout the country is like duck hunting has been terrible for the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And for us on a year like this, nothing really changed for us. I mean, I kept looking at the extended forecast thinking, oh man, our September was a little bit tougher. Last couple of Septembers haven't been great. We had a better hatch this year, but it was so hot.
It's just Teal Town.
Just ridiculous, right? Yeah. And, birds are doing stupid stuff and the guides are getting upset. And in September, I was like, oh man.
It's going to be a tough year.
Going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
Yep. Going to be a tough one. But then you think, you're watching that 10-day forecast and you're like, okay, here it comes. Oh, we're getting up to the 1st of October. We're going to get that first front. Oh, nope. Came and went. Didn't happen. Okay, well, we're getting up to MEA. We got the full moon around MEA. We're going to get a front around then. Oh, nope. Didn't happen.
Right.
Halloween's coming. Right.
Got to be good.
Always get a front on Halloween. And we got a mini one. We got a small one. But that came and went, you know. But throughout all of that, our process was the same. We have our, so we kind of have like a little map that the guides all talk about, and we're, here's where everybody's going. This is where we're scouting. This is where we saw birds. And we just went, nothing really changed.
Were the guides panicking?
The guides were a little chippy early.
Yeah.
A little chippy early. Like, I'd say the second week of October, when we had duck opener was really, and so the other thing that you have to remember with Minnesota this year, this looked like it was going to be one of the greatest duck seasons in our history because of how wet we were in June and July.
For sure.
I mean, every field that we hunted had flooded out spots that at one point was holding sheet water and flooded crops.
Yep.
When you have that, you will kill ducks.
Really good, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a really good duck hunter. I've told you this before. I'm a really good duck hunting guide in flooded corn. Really good.
For sure.
Yep. But so when you have, so like, I mean, in our email blast that I put out to all of our customers, I was so excited for this season because of how wet we were. Well, then, the second to last week in August came, or the weekend before Labor Day, and we got a little shot of rain.
Yep.
And it didn't rain again
right
until MEA weekend. That's 2.5 months.
Bad.
Of almost 3 months of zero precipitation.
And it was hot.
So it's hot.
Yep.
We have no water.
Yep.
We have no migration. But
yeah, that's why I'm like, your back's against the wall here. I mean, this is bad. This is a bad setup.
Yep.
I mean, me and Joey were looking around in October like, I don't know what's going to happen with some of these guides if we're being straight, because it's like, shoot, man, like you can't have people come if there's not any birds. Right. You know what I mean? And then it's like, all right, well then if they're going to come and they do come, like they might never come back.
Yep.
So yeah, man, I mean, so like what changed for you? Like was there anything that did change, or just started like, you focused on geese a little more and less on ducks? Like, what was your strategy?
Actually, we shot more ducks this year than we did big honkers. And it was mainly mallards. So I have a couple different theories on it. And, the one thing that was good is because it was so dry, harvest went quick. True. So we had a lot of food, right? So we had fields out, food out.
Yep.
Farmers didn't have any issues, getting crops out because it didn't rain. Right. So they're just blowing through stuff.
Totally.
So beans went out quick and they were right into corn.
Yep.
Corn came out quick. You still are getting your calendar migration birds. There are birds that will still migrate on the calendar, not based on the weather. So you still, you get your pushes of those, and the areas that typically start to pick up birds on calendar migration times, they still got those. Maybe it wasn't as many because we didn't have the cold front, but we still had birds.
Yeah.
So we didn't have as much water, but we did have lots of food. And while we didn't have, like those cold, windy, nasty, northwest wind days.
Yep.
What we also didn't have is as you know, like once we start getting cold and we start making sheet water on the ponds and stuff, the feeding patterns of the bird changes.
Totally.
So they, we start losing that morning feed.
Talk about that a little bit without going too far into the weather cycle, because we're going to save that.
Yep. So when you start making ice, those birds tend to sit on water a little bit longer, and general theory is they want to stay on water to keep the water open.
Hold it open.
Right. Yeah, hold it open. Right. So like the feeding becomes secondary to keeping that water open.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you lose your morning feed, right? And then you're into your evening feed, and then the evening feed starts to be affected by hunting pressure. And the more pressure they have, the later and later they feed, which leads to birds feeding after sundown.
Yep.
Okay, so you wait all day. You've got this field full of birds. You don't even get the opportunity to screw it up because they don't come out while you can kill them.
For sure.
Right? So, but this year, because it never got cold,
you got the
and we
morning feed.
Never got that point where we were below freezing, we never had that. So we kept a very consistent morning and evening feed. And there were times where it was actually the birds were feeding harder in the morning, which we've mainly become used to, like, expecting them to shoot them in the afternoon. Like that's
ducks,
just,
you're saying
ducks and big honkers
really.
Yep. Especially out there, like in western Minnesota, you do get a pretty fair amount of hunting pressure out there. There's a lot of water. There's a lot of public water. There's a lot of ponds, and there's a lot of freelancers. So those birds do get a fair amount of pressure.
Yep.
But
do you think that affects them at all in terms of coming to fields, though?
I definitely.
In terms of, you feel like it pushes them into fields, or you feel like
them people hunting them on the water?
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily. I don't think that. I mean, ducks and geese are always going to find a safe place.
For sure.
So if they get pushed off of a spot, they're always going to find a safe space. I think it just affects it more of when you're going to give you that opportunity to be able to shoot them. And that was for us, I think the biggest thing this year is that we never run. We only had one weekend, like the November full moon was really tough. That was our worst weekend of hunting year. We had actually we went 0-0 2 days in a row.
Okay. Yeah.
Never happens.
Bad, yeah.
You know, that's bad. It never happens. And and what stinks is after those 2 days, because we had some groups that were just 2 day groups, they came in there and they literally did not squeeze the trigger for 2 days. The day after that, we got a front. And then we shot the hell out of them, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then we got that big front and then all of a sudden it got real good. And now we've got mallards everywhere, obviously, because, you know, Canada's empty now and we've had northwest winds and all those things. But, you know, throughout this season, we were just, you know, and we still talk about it. Like we were amazed that we just kept putting up these big stacks of mallards.
Yeah,
and
dude,
Canada.
like it's crazy. I mean, I've been seeing the posts, like it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of ducks I've seen you shooting, and I'm sitting like watching, you know, local ducks just trade water.
Yeah,
you know, like,
right.
The whole morning, and you're like, check my phone, and Graham's got like 40 ducks on the ground, and you're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it just worked out.
It just worked out. And, you know, we have a good process. We've got a good crew.
Yeah.
We've got great relationships with landowners and farmers. We pay a lot, you know, that helps.
Yeah.
They
call you.
We have access. Yeah. We get access to a lot of ground. We have a lot of people that like working with us. And I don't, you know, beyond that, I don't know what it was, because if it wasn't those things, then we just got lucky, because it was phenomenal.
So you talked to other guides, I'm assuming, in Minnesota.
Yep.
What have you heard from other people?
You know, it was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard.
Well, so there's two things this year is that guides this year had, you know, it was election year. So a lot of times in election years, people's like discretionary expenses, they tend to tighten up a little bit. Yeah. And I think for a lot of those guides that don't have, you know, developed marketing portfolios, that rely, you know, really heavily on repeat and referral, you know, that pool of customers was much shallower this year.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of guides that had really lean years to begin with. And then on top of it, slow hunting, a lot of them just threw up their hands and said, don't come. And that's good for us, because people find us easily. And, you know, from the people that I talked to, they were just, you know, they were really having a tough time. Now I will say in our metro hunts this year, our metro crew had a really tough time. September, October into early to mid-November. Now they're starting to beat them up because the weather's getting right. And
then duck season is closed, so it's all good.
Yeah, and the birds are finally getting off the football fields and the golf course and the park, because now they're going after the corn, which, you know, they just have been generally in town eating grass for the last 3 months.
Why not?
Yeah. So our metro crew definitely had their hardest year. They might have had their hardest year ever.
Yeah.
But our Western Minnesota crew, when we were out in South Dakota wasn't even actually as good as it normally is for us, but it was still good. But you know, those areas, those rural areas, I mean, we wore them out.
It's just insane.
Yeah.
It's really cool. We'll get back to this in a second. Guys, this podcast is also brought to you by First Light, and some of our favorite pieces of First Light had just been on the Black Friday sale, so I hope you guys took advantage of that. But if you didn't, go check out the Rugged Wool hoodie or the Rugged Wool wader pants. The wader pants especially are for sure the warmest wader pants I've ever had, and they're way less bulky than the other competing pants you can get for underneath your waders. So go check them out at firstlight.com. So I mean, it's just crazy to me, man, because I think one of the questions I wanted to ask you was what percentage of guides is that their full-time job? Is it few and far between kind of in Minnesota?
I mean, we have, I guess 5, we have a crew of 5 this is what they do. I mean, not, you know, off season, they do other stuff. We do have one, our main guide, like our guide foreman, Mike Peters, he's on salary 12 months out of the year.
I just mean for other like guide owners,
like
guys that own a guide service, you know, how many of them is that like all they do?
I don't think a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think a lot.
Almost all of them that I talk to, Graham, have, you know, a side hustle or some other thing.
Sure.
Or the hunting is the kind of the side hustle.
Yep.
And for those guys, I think it's different where they're like, oh, you know what, this year I'll just tell people not to come.
Right.
Because I heard that a lot this year.
Yep.
Well, I'm just going to close my books for the year and call it a wash and just move on.
Yeah.
And then I'm checking in and maxed out is shooting like stacks of mallards every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just weird, man. It's, it's one of those tough things. I feel for those guys.
Yep.
And I know like you said, the Metro and I think even South probably had a pretty tough year, you know, and I think maybe they'll make up for it in the back end with some goose hunting maybe. If they can. But yeah, I mean, in terms of shooting ducks in Minnesota this year, I mean, this might be one of the worst duck seasons that I've had.
Yep.
I mean, it's just bad.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are probably in the same situation with you, and honestly, we should have been there with you. In reality, we really should have.
Well, yeah, and that's why it was surprising.
Yeah,
it's just kind of crazy. In terms of like your book of business, are a lot of people repeat clients?
Yeah, I would say on a typical year, probably 70% are repeat. This year was probably closer to 50. I would expect, because I've since the election, I've already had, 10 groups that have booked with us in the past.
That didn't this year?
That they hadn't this year, maybe even the year before, that are now like, hey, we want to get back. They're booking their hunt for next year now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Do you usually just put in, like every year, kind of just write in your head, like, 50% of my books are going to be repeat?
I don't have, so we have a process. We go through, we get everything done with our season. Our lodge manager, Ashley, we craft an email, and she goes through and she emails every single group of customers that we had coming out saying, hey, we want you guys back out. You're a priority. We want you guys to have first pick of dates. But at the same time, we also don't wait on them, because there are mini groups that are, like, oh yeah, we're coming. Oh, we're not coming.
Yeah.
Right. So I try to give those customers an opportunity to get their dates, but at the same time, I let them know I'm not going to hold them.
For sure.
So, I mean, this is how we eat, right? So we got to eat.
Yeah.
And I like to eat. So we, we're pretty aggressive with that early in the off season, trying to get those customers that we have that are happy back with us again. And at that same time, that is also the same time that traditionally, like, one of our biggest booking periods every year is right now through like mid-February. Mm-hmm. So we book a ton of hunts right now as people are, they had a shitty season. They've been watching our stuff. They're like, that's the guide service that I want to go with next year. And they're getting all that stuff lined up now. And so I'm actually a lot of the inquiries that I'm taking right now are for next year, whether it's past customers, new customers, whatever.
Yeah. Tell me one of your favorite hunts from this year.
Oh boy. Favorite hunt from this year. Let me think. Probably one of the the funnest hunt that I was on this year this one was in South Dakota. It was a dry field hunt. We're in a cornfield. The ducks, we had kind of been chasing this group of ducks and geese, and they were kind of bouncing around on us. So we had gotten into them a little bit, but not a lot, because again, we didn't have great weather. So we didn't have heavy feed weather, but we had a group of guys in, from, let's see where those guys were from, Louisiana, and a good group of clients. They'd been out with us before. And we went into a cornfield. It was foggy, kind of shitty, but not shitty enough, kind of one of those things. Yeah. And the mallards and widgeon were on us early, and then we had, and then it was nothing, right? And
so you had shot some birds though at this point.
Yeah, we had shot some birds. We maybe had 20 down, right? And then it just went nothing. Well, then out in South Dakota, there was just an insane amount of specks. Okay, well then the specks started rolling. What happens out there is, we can't kill them. Like, I don't know how people kill specks down south, because the specks that we have up here are literally unhuntable. Okay. So like they get to every flock comes in like they're going to do it. They're bowed up. They're locked up. Everything looks great. They get to 150 yards. They hit a wall. They go straight up in the air.
Do you have spec decoys out?
Yes.
So you had spec decoys out, and does anyone blow a spec call?
It doesn't matter. Spec call, no spec call, spec decoys, no spec decoys, duck decoys, goose decoys, snow goose. It doesn't matter. Like, it's the same reaction from every flock. So we don't even, like, if we kill them, it's because they kill themselves. And it really has nothing to do with what we do.
Yeah.
So then the specs start rolling, and they're just giving us the middle finger left and right. And so we needed to scout for the next day. So I left the hunt to go scout. Well, as soon as I left, the skies cleared. Like the fog lifted, the skies cleared, and
Still morning?
still morning.
Yeah.
Yep. This is probably 9:45.
Okay.
And I'm watching from the road, and shit just gets nuts. Like snows, big flock of snows dumps in. Then it's a flock of specks that dumps in. Then it's a flock of big honkers. Then this big twist of mallards comes in and dumps in on these guys. So we go from like 20 birds down to 80
Yeah.
in like 45 minutes. And it's just like it is just, it was awesome, and so I wasn't even there for all of it, but like watching the clients, that was a once in a lifetime hunt.
Totally.
That we gave them, and even for us guides, like that was, that's going to be a top 10 hunt of the year.
Oh yeah, man.
It was just a really, I've been on hunts where we've shot more birds, but just because and then we have this awesome picture. I found the spot when we were done, the log set up right. So we've got mallards. We've got we got mallards going down the front log. There's a back log. There's a bunch of giant Canadas on that. All the hens are on a small little log here. We've got a game strap with specks hanging from a tree. We got a game strap with snows hanging from a tree. There's just carnage everywhere in this picture, and it's
such an awesome mixed bag.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, just like probably one of the best mixed bag hunts I've ever been on.
Yeah, that's so sick, dude.
Yeah,
that's so fun. And those clients will never forget that.
Nope, never forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime you get a mallard tornado,
yep,
like that's an incredible hunt.
Oh, absolutely.
And then when you're getting snows dumping with them, and snows are the worst, dude.
Yeah.
They're just the worst.
Well, you haven't hunted specks in South Dakota. Give that a shot before you think snows are the worst, because the specks,
I've hunted snows in South Dakota.
Yeah, I have too. Yeah,
bunch of times.
Yep.
And it sucks.
Yep, correct.
It's if you get them, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
But you get them, never.
It's such a small window.
And dude, like, if you're a freelancer, you got to commit to like probably a good 10-day stretch if you want to get on snows.
Yep.
If you have like a long weekend, kiss her goodbye, bud.
Yep.
Like you might end up on a day where you could maybe shoot 10 or 20.
Yep.
And if you end up on a hunt, and if you have like a long weekend and you end up in a spot where you're shooting 100 of them, that is just pure luck.
Yep.
Because unless you like really live and breathe how those birds are migrating, it is so hard to pattern and figure out, because the reality is, man, like people don't realize, like if you go to a place and you find snow geese and there's 60,000 of them in a field, dude, you don't go back there tomorrow.
Yep.
They will not be there.
Right.
They are gone. It doesn't matter if you have permission on the field they were in at 5 p.m. the night before.
Yep.
They will not be there the next day.
Yep.
And when you're on them, you're actually not on them.
Yep.
You need to be further north if you're on them.
Yep.
And that's the crazy thing that people just don't get. Is there anything else like that like you would want to speak on? Because I know you chase them more than I chase them, obviously. So like when you're going out and you're trying to put clients on snow geese, like what are your biggest factors in trying to figure them out?
You just got to hunt them. That's really what it comes down to, because there isn't, so much about snow geese is not, it's not just about having birds, it's about having the right birds.
Totally.
Right. And if you don't have the right birds, it just, it generally is not going to matter unless you have a really special weather event day.
Yeah.
Then you can get into those older adults. But, you just have to hunt them day in and day out. And the hard thing is what we do now, or what I try to do, is just set the right expectation with clients when they book. Like I tell everybody, like this is the ultimate, you are going muskie fishing. When you are snow goose hunting, like it is the ultimate boomer bust hunt. And, there's so many things that have to align. And if you think about like hunting them in South Dakota, right?
Yeah.
You think about the fall migration. Fall migration starts probably at the very end of August, right? Goes through August, September, October, November, December, maybe a little bit into January. January birds are probably where they're going to end up for the year.
Kind of, yeah.
Unless they didn't get frozen out up north and they get one of those big polar vortexes in the Dakotas and that finally pushes them out. Like you'll get some of that. Okay. Spring migration starts at the end of January. And generally here in the States, it's, so like you've got February, March, and maybe a little bit of April.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all those fowl that migrated over 6 months. They go back in 2.
Right.
that's really fast.
Really fast.
Like that is really hard to catch them.
They are really, really bunched up too, man.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the hard part is patterning them when they're feeding like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a guide, it's the worst when you're there and, you know that all the birds left, but there's birds south, but you don't have a north wind, or, you don't have a south wind, you've got a north wind. So they're not showing up today, right? And the clients, their last day of their hunt is tomorrow, and the wind doesn't switch out of the south until 9:00 in the morning. Like, that's what really sucks as a guide.
Yeah.
When you're just in between those gaps, and it's really gonna take kind of a miracle of those birds pushing up, but at the same time, you still have to hunt them because you don't know, and you can't predict that, and they're here, and so, you sit and you wait, and you just wait for those new birds to roll in, and you hope the weather changes, and you hope that the forecast was wrong.
Yeah.
And you wake up to a south wind, but that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah. No, it doesn't usually happen.
Yeah.
So what's the rest of your year look like? And really quick, Graham, before we do that, this podcast is brought to you by Migra Ammo. Have you shot any Migra?
That's all I shoot.
Let's go, baby. A lot of people ask us what our favorite thing about Migra is. My answer is that it's extremely consistent.
Yep.
What would you say you love about it?
It kills shit.
Yeah.
I mean, dead.
Yeah.
Like
the
not
stacked
an
load
option.
is different, man.
Yes, it for sure is.
It for sure is. The way that it shoots and the opportunity that it gives you, if you're maybe not a perfect shot, I think that is the biggest difference, and that's it always comes out of my gun.
Yep.
I don't remember having a dud from Migra in the last 2 years, which is a big issue with a lot of ammunition companies.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah,
And
there's
sucks.
many brands that I will not put through my gun anymore.
Yep. Same.
Yep.
All right, so go check out migraammo.com. So the rest of your year, now you're focused mostly on geese, or you start thinking more about ducks in Kansas, or what's your thought process here?
We've got about a month of guiding hunts. We'll guide big honkers here in the metro all through December. Adam and his crew, Adam, Sally, Matt, and Hennon, and Mike West, they run all those all through December. Our Western Minnesota crew that was guiding out there, half of them, all the Kansas guys are back down in Kansas right now. They're getting ready. We actually start our first duck hunt in Kansas right after Thanksgiving. So we'll guide duck hunts down there all the way through December and January.
How's that looking?
It's looking good now. It was not looking good a week ago. I was scared. We actually rescheduled hunts. We had some hunts this last weekend down there, and we rescheduled those.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That bad?
It's pretty tough. Yeah, pretty tough. Well, just think about what you're seeing here. It's 800 miles south.
Yeah.
Right? So this front really helped a lot.
For sure.
A lot of those birds pushed through. It's better. This cold snap that we're going to get here, we'll be fine.
Right at Thanksgiving. What is it? Friday? It's like 18 is the high?
Yeah, I think we've got 6 days in a row where it doesn't get above freezing.
Yeah.
Winnipeg is, Winnipeg
cold.
will be froze out. It's real cold up there right now.
Yeah.
So right now that looks the first half of December. So the last 3 years in Kansas, like the first part, it's been really warm. The first part of December has been tougher just because it's been so warm the last 3 years. We won't have that this year. It's going to be, as soon as we start on that first hunt, it will be gangbusters from there. Unless we get another, giant cold front or, whatever happens, or it gets real warm and those birds go back north, which does happen down there.
Yeah.
But right now, December.
Reverse migration.
Yeah.
Isn't that insane?
That's a real thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. I will never forget the first time that I really thought about that a bunch was, gosh, who did we have on here? Stan Guzzi.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Guzzi was on, and he's like, and he guides in Kansas.
Yep.
And he said, some of my best days in Kansas are always reverse migration.
Mm-hmm.
When birds think it's, we can go back a little bit north, coming back out of Missouri or whatever.
Yep.
And shoot them in Kansas. You find that to be pretty true?
Yeah. Especially once we get into January, we start switching from, October, November, December, you're thinking cold, northwest winds, clouds. You get into January, you want south winds and warm temps, because that's when you're bringing your fresh birds back up, and that's when hunting gets real good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't probably think about that at all, but
no. And it took me 3-4 years to really, fully understand, it's just a whole different thing down there than when we are up here.
Yeah.
You just don't ever experience that in Western Minnesota. You're we're not hunting snow geese up here. We're not really thinking about the reverse migration ever in Minnesota. You're always thinking about that northern migration.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. And yeah, you're totally right, especially for the northern half of the country. You're never thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah.
And I think actually it's funny too. I mean, when you first start hunting, you don't think about the wind at all, hardly.
Right.
Unless somebody is teaching you.
Yep.
Unless somebody's like, oh yeah, we really need to be thinking about this wind. I don't think a lot of young guys that are starting out, if they're not being taught by their dad or something.
Yep.
I don't think a lot of dudes are really thinking about that at all.
No, definitely not.
Yep. But it plays a huge factor in it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think one thing I wanted to touch on too, like December geese in Minnesota.
Yep.
Is some of the most fun you can have, right?
Can be.
It can be.
Can be.
It can suck too.
Yep.
But a lot of the time, man, like this is when we get a really good chance to have some really fun goose
Oh, yeah.
hunts.
Yeah.
And there's nothing better than when you're catching them on what was supposed to be, a little dusting of snow and turns into like 3 inches in the morning, and
Yep.
they just need to eat no matter what, and you can do no wrong.
Yep.
And that's like when I think about goose hunting, that's what I think about.
Yep.
Is that perfect day where it's like a 9 a.m. little snow burst and they've just been chilling on water, keeping it open.
Yep.
And yeah, they got to go eat. And it's just, it doesn't even matter if you have decoys set up around their side or whatever. They're just coming to the field.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. The challenge that we have is December honkers are a ton of fun. The challenge is when you guide, but for December honkers to be really fun, to have, you got to have the spit and snow, and you got to have all that stuff. Because if you get a 30
last year December,
a 30-degree sunny day with a 5 mile an hour wind in December is a death sentence.
Absolutely.
For guides, not for geese. That is just the worst forecast you can possibly have. Or 5 degrees and clear and cold and no wind. Like,
for sure.
It just sucks, unless you get a bunch of birds migrating over that got froze out from somewhere, or then you can beat them up. But like, you're just truly getting lucky at that point, because your plan that you had, it ain't happening.
Yeah. And a lot of people see, places like where Joe Heinz is at in Fergus, which one of the things that, we should chat about really quick before we close out here is like the different places that have been great in Minnesota have continued to change. And this is something you texted me about.
Yep.
And I wanted to just chat about it a little bit, because it is crazy how much the landscape and, these different power plants closing and how we're holding birds versus birds migrating through, how much of that, people don't realize has changed.
Yep.
And what's going to happen next, I think, is one of the biggest questions people have in Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so when I sent you that text, and it's something that I've been thinking about, because we see it on a big scale and a small scale as a guide service, right?
Yeah.
So on a small scale, what we look at is like different roosts. Like we have this place called the Elk Farm out in Western Minnesota, and the Elk Farm was, for about 5 years, always held a good concentration of birds. We would run 2 hunts a week off Elk Farm birds. Okay.
Yeah.
Montevideo used to be stacked with giant Canada geese. And we used to run 3 to 4 hunts a week off of, just
what
in
year
Montevideo.
was this?
This is probably, Elk Farm 5 years ago, Montevideo 10.
Okay.
Right. Montevideo hasn't been like really, really good like it used to be for quite a while.
Yeah.
And there's really not a reason for it. The birds stopped roosting where they normally roost. Even though there was water, they
open water.
Yep. Yeah. They just it just has not been the same.
Food source changed a lot out there?
Nope. They just kind of stopped using that area like they used to do it.
Is that, do you feel like that was a big switch over to like Fergus being a big spot then? Is that kind of congruent with that happening?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. And I think some of it is like what we're seeing now, the places that giant Canada geese like to roost are starting to change a little bit. Like when they used to go to Montevideo real heavy, we call it the county slough. It's right on the edge of town. Used to hold, 20, 30,000 Canada geese just right behind the subway there, right in Montevideo. It was awesome. Okay. You might get 1,000 out there now when it's real good.
Yeah.
Right. Those birds now roost on the river. And we're seeing that more and more with giant Canada geese. They're going away from those larger like shit ponds and that type of thing.
Yeah.
We're starting to see them roost on rivers a lot more.
Do we have any idea why?
No. I mean, it has to be, it has to be privacy. That's the only thing that I could, because they can tuck into a river bend somewhere and just get away from everybody, and they're much more secluded. That's the only, I mean, that's usually what I find is that birds are either looking for more food or more safety.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not like they're unsafe in the slough behind the subway.
Fair.
Right?
Well, fair,
I mean,
but
like,
there's more people around, there's more activity, there's more, so it's like if a goose can go somewhere where there isn't, 200 cars driving by them in a day versus a spot where they can go and they don't see a human all day, they're probably going to go towards that spot. Even though they haven't been shot at there, they're probably going to go to that spot where they're not going to see a human all day.
Yeah, it makes me question it a little bit, though, because it's like we also see them feed in the soccer field, like every single day.
Yep.
And like you said, like they're in parks and stuff. So I just, in my head, I'm like, so it's convenient when they're eating, but like when they're roosting or chilling, like they don't really want to be by people, which I guess makes sense in a way. But
I can see, I can definitely see what you're saying as well. Yeah, I mean that's the thing that I've always, like that's how I've made sense of it to myself.
Yeah.
But we see that pattern in a lot of different places. There's a lot of different times now where we see birds roosting on the river more than they will on their traditional sloughs, ponds, lakes, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the river by my house has more birds on it than it normally does.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yep.
like I totally understand.
Yep.
I'm not saying that I disagree with the numbers. I have no idea though. Like,
Yep.
When we see these things, I think as a waterfowl hunter, you want to be like, well, why?
Right.
Like, what's the reason for this?
Yep. Yep.
And it doesn't make sense. And I think another crazy thing is like, well, there goes trying to shoot them on the river.
Oh, for sure. Exactly. Exactly.
Damn, there goes
Unless
that
it's the
fun.
last day of the season.
Right.
Yep. But no, so like that's kind of on like a small scale view, how I view it. But, you think back to like when I was a kid, when I grew up, October 1st, Lac Parle Lake used to have 80 to 150,000 geese, right? Now on October 1st, we'd be lucky to have 500. Okay. So Lac was like the place to go forever. And then it was kind of Hutch, right? Hutch kind of popped off there for a while.
Yeah.
Back when Phil was real big and Phil was, so Hutch was kind of a big destination there for a while. And then that kind of fell off. Then it was Rochester.
Yep.
Rochester was really good. Rochester
Silver
had a
Lake.
really nice stretch, right? Now it's just not, it's not the same. You think about like Scott used to run all those society hunts and all those things down there. He doesn't run those anymore. And then Fergus.
I think he's still running a society hunt.
Oh, does he? Oh, okay.
I think so,
Are those instructional hunts or whatever it was?
Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure. I think
yeah.
Scott was guiding for a while too.
Yeah.
Well, I know he was back in the day. I don't know when he stopped.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah, but it's different.
Yep.
It's different.
It's
now.
different.
It's not like, and if you go on a society hunt, you might not go down there thinking like, I mean, you probably will shoot him pretty good because I think Scott has a pretty good beat on like weather cycles and stuff like that. But yeah, man, it's different. And Scott will tell you it's different.
Yep.
Yep. And then now it's Fergus.
Yeah, and I would even say, I think it
Fergus
seems
has
like
lost some of their birds.
Fergus has passed its peak. You're seeing that peak is starting to wind down now, where it wasn't, 4 or 5 years ago when Feet Down was going strong and just absolutely, beating the hell out of them
every day.
But again,
same pits.
They had good weather. They had a lot of different factors. We haven't had great weather. Like, this was probably a terrible year for Fergus this year. You see all of these different areas that, blow up and then kind of diminish. And then this one blows up and then it diminishes. And so it's an interesting pattern. I wish I understood it more, and I wish I understood, but I think we all do, like what causes that and how could we predict what's going to be the next one? But
well, I think the big thing with it, right, is like some of these things we can kind of point at.
Yeah.
I mean, like in Rochester, they stopped, like the water is not open anymore. Right.
Yep.
And in Fergus, they closed a power plant. Well, the water's not open anymore.
Yep.
And so I think that we can see some of that.
Mm-hmm.
The Hutch transition, I don't know I don't really know the exact reasoning behind why birds kind of shut off.
Yep.
I know Hutch still shoots a lot of birds.
Yep.
But it's not like it was, like you said. And, I don't think even, well, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I was going to say, Lac, from what I've been told, I never saw it with my own eyes, but 80,000, sometimes 100,000 geese in Lac. I don't know that, was Rochester or Fergus ever at 100,000 birds like that? Well, because Lac was different.
Yeah,
right.
Well, Lac is a different subspecies of birds. That's an EPP bird.
Yeah.
And that's what so that those big numbers, I think the biggest number that I ever remember growing up in the refuge, and I think it's documented on the state site, is like 210,000.
Oh my gosh.
But a lot of those are EPP birds. There's not, as many giant Canadas mixed in there.
Yeah. And Rochester was really famous for the giant Canada
Yes.
geese.
Yep. So we never, lac, the big difference there is that lac was never, really, for whatever reason, because it's still not, like, it wasn't really a great home for giant Canadas. Those EPPs loved it, but now they moved on. And where they went, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that because they're miserable birds to hunt. But
when there's 200,000 of them, though, it's all right.
Yeah. I mean, they're somewhere, they're somewhere. Yeah. But I mean, if you want to talk about what it's like to hunt snow geese in Canada, that's what EPPs are like. They're really, really tough birds to hunt.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them, so sometimes that's what
Works
you get away
out.
with. You get away with volume. Right. But I just think it's interesting if you look through all these different areas, and we see it down in Kansas, some of the areas that we, and more on a smaller scale in Kansas, we have areas that we used to hunt. And when I say an area, I'm talking like a 10 square mile area, like this area. You guys got to go to this area and scout tonight, because we would run almost a hunt a day in some of those spots. And now there's some of those spots we haven't hunted in 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. And some of that has to do with drought, and they lost a lot of water. But like, there are areas that birds have just generally stopped using, and why that is, what that is, yes, water is an important part of it, but there is still water down there, but there's no birds.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, do you have any idea what the actual, like, switch kind of shutting off was in lac? I'm sure there's multiple factors, but like, can we even pinpoint it at any point? Like,
it'd be tough to say, because back then I wasn't as dialed into it as I am now. Back then we were just running around shooting birds, and my livelihood didn't depend on it, so I didn't think about it as much.
Yeah.
But you just notice the declining numbers. But even when I first started Maxed Out Guides, I mean, we're in year 17 now. I would say, I knew it was in decline because I knew it wasn't what it used to be. But I would say the last probably like 6-7 years in lac have really been, like, there were still times, like we filmed it, it's probably 10 years ago now, we filmed with Babe Winkleman out there, MEA weekend, and just drilled them, right?
Yeah.
And just had geese pouring out. It was a great show. We had a lot of fun. We shot a bunch of birds, and we would never be able to do that on MEA weekend now. Like, I don't remember the last time that we hunted lac on MEA weekend, just because there's no birds.
Yeah, and that's just obviously a change in continued cycles of birds when they're actually leaving or going or staying or all those things, you know, and food source and water, and if they have open water or not.
Yep.
But some of these things you look at and you're like, I can't really pinpoint the reason. Like, it almost doesn't really make sense.
Yep.
Do you feel like, and I've heard this from a lot of people, do you feel like birds are spreading out more? I
think so.
Less congregated?
Yeah. I mean, and just, I think just, there's a lot of factors to it. The stages of the migration are different. The calendar migration birds are still there. There's just not nearly as many of them. So, you don't get those big waves of birds like we used to. You just don't get the birds that just show up just because anymore. You don't get as many of them, right? Probably 10% of what it used to be.
Yeah.
So, there's just so many different factors that could go into it. Like with lac is a mystery to me because there's food everywhere. The state,
it makes no sense.
The state does a great job of like the habitat in the refuge. There's farm fields everywhere out there. There's tons of food, tons of, beans, corn, but yet, even the we just don't get birds on lac until until a lot of that small water freezes up. We get a big push down. We got a huge push last weekend with that front. That was super awesome to see. But, our season's over out there. So we got one great weekend of that great push. And, whereas now if we had this push in October, like we used to, you'd be set up, your November's made, your November's set.
Yeah.
Right. And now we didn't even get a chance to hunt those birds. And what's going to happen now is for the people that are still hunting them out there, we're going to be, you're going to be sub freezing for 6 days in a row. They're going to have those birds for about 10 days and they're going to be gone.
Yeah.
I know I have some buddies out in western Minnesota that were walking on sloughs today. It was so frozen up out there.
I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's cold here. I mean, the pond outside of my house is frozen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Oh, it's crazy, man.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah. And yeah, it's you look at we watch the weather attempts in Winnipeg, and for whatever reason, throughout the fall, Winnipeg has almost the exact same temperatures as we do in western Minnesota all of October and November. It doesn't really, this was really the first stretch where they got much colder than we were. There was times where Winnipeg was warmer than it was in Milan this fall.
Crazy.
Tell me how that works.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't figure that out, know, and the weather is just the last 2 years is very perplexing.
Yeah.
It's just totally confusing. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you almost want to be like, it's a fluke. We're going to get some cold weather.
Yeah.
But then we don't.
For 3 years in a row.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre, man. And
Yeah.
I can't really make sense of that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're going to, if I'm being honest. So there's 100 different opinions on what's going on with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's very bizarre, and it's weird because it's a continuation. It's a thing that's happening now. We're starting to see a pattern.
Yeah.
How many years of that pattern before we're like, this is a real thing?
Right. Right. And that's what I really hope that, like, from a state standpoint, that they really start, and I get it, state has to look at big picture and they look at a lot of different things, but we're getting to the point where we have enough data and we have enough, like, years stacked on top of each other to show us that, hey, we probably shouldn't be opening up
on September 23rd.
On September 23rd. Like, we don't actually need to do that.
Right.
Like, we're shooting green wing teal last week.
Yeah.
People are concerned about
what is that?
Yeah, I mean, we're shooting teal and wood ducks into mid-November now.
Yeah.
So if we're concerned about people that want to get out there and shoot teal, there's plenty of teal to shoot.
Yeah.
All through October into early Now the blue wingers, they might take off, but there's plenty of teal to shoot almost all of duck season now.
And the crazy thing is, you'll see both of them. You'll see blues and greens.
Oh yeah.
And it's bizarre, but yeah, you will see them in Minnesota all the way till the last day of duck season. It's nuts.
Yep.
But yeah. Well, Graham, thank you so much for coming on.
You bet.
We really appreciate it. If anybody wants to book a hunt with Graham, where would they go, Graham?
maxedoutguides.com. You can follow us on our social channels. Hop on our email list. We send out email blasts usually about once every other week, and it's all sent by me.
I've also seen geesefearus.com.
Geesefearus.com,
Is that also a legit link?
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah, it's our old marketing URL.
Perfect, man.
Yeah.
Guys, if you go get a chance to go hunt with Graham, he runs a hell of an organization. You guys are going to be pumped about it. So go make sure you check it out. If you just follow your Facebook page, you'll be very jealous most of the year. If it's anything like this year, you'll be very shocked and very jealous. So go do that, and you guys can check out what he's doing. But thanks for coming, man.
Absolutely.
We'll see you guys on the next one. Hey, Graham, one more thing, by the way.